Hey everybody, I'm Tim Mooney with the Timothy Mooney Repertory Theater, and welcome to yet another of my video explainers of my one-man shows. This one's about Man Cave, a one-man sci-fi climate change tragicomedy. You can view that play either in person, if you bring me into your school, conference, festival, or theater, or you can view it in its entirety on my video website, breakneckshakespeare.com. Recently, I did a special online Earth Day presentation discussing several of the ideas in this play, along with a 4-minute clip from the play itself, which introduces a theme that ends up carrying the weight of the action as this play proceeds. It struck me that some of you folks who are out there weighing issues of climate change, or perhaps wondering whether you might want to book me for a show, or perhaps to catch the online performance, might well want to understand more of the play's gestation or inspiration. So, I'm repeating that Earth Day presentation here for your entertainment or understanding. You can find more on my work, including links to books such as Man Cave, in both young adult and adult versions. The adult version has somewhat saltier language, which you'll notice in my brief performance here tonight. Consider yourself forewarned at timmooneyRep.com. Those books come complete with footnotes and much more discussion of the issues at hand, which I will only barely be able to hint at in this video. Also, if you pick up a copy of my book at timmooneyRep.com, I would be happy to inscribe it for you. Here we go. So, back in 2017, amid a flurry of articles that kept popping up on my news feed, I forced myself to look long and hard at the issue of climate change and to take some kind of action. I couldn't let myself sit idly by while witnessing what may be the end of our species. I have a hard time even speaking that out loud because once you say end of our species, people assume that you're an alarmist and overreacting, and thereby proceed to dismiss anything else that you might say. And that may explain why I approached this issue in a particular way. I happen to be an actor who writes and performs one-man plays, mostly about Shakespeare and Moliere. So I decided to explore this issue in the area that I know best. I'm no kind of scientist, but as an actor, I do kind of qualify as an amateur psychologist. Man Cave, a one-man sci-fi climate change tragicomedy, opens on a man talking into a microphone, broadcasting to an unknown audience. We quickly learn that he has no idea if there is anyone out there hearing him, because, as we also learn, climate change has left much and maybe all of the planet uninhabitable. And largely through dumb luck, Tim, that's his name as well as mine, set himself up in an underground bunker just far enough north that his solar panels and electrical supply have not burned out or melted down. I say dumb luck because Tim is no more of a scientist than I am. I'd like to share a brief excerpt from the show in which Tim, broadcasting into the void to whomever else might still be out there listening, comes to realize just what he has to offer to this unknowable audience. It introduces the theme that will weave its way through to the end of the play. Lights up. The question: is this inevitable? Will our technology always outrun our maturity? Individually, yes, I can put my hand on that stove. I have that ability, but most of us reach sufficient cognition before we actually do any damage with that stove. Likewise, fireworks, alcohol, cars, sometimes the tiniest touch on the stove, a fender bender with the car, enough to get us to adjust our behavior. But collectively, as a species, as a group, we default to the age of 9. We cannot come to the collective conclusion that it is time to stop drinking, to douse our fireworks, or to take our foot off of the gas. And so we race screaming off into the darkness. Is this the answer that awaits us all? Humans, Klingons, cockroach, lizard people, droids. Maybe droids could figure this out. Hey, they had 3 laws of robotics. Why didn't we have those programmed into us? In the billions of worlds that are out there, there must be some tiny fraction that can sustain life. Some evolve slowly. They may still be in the amoeba stage. Others faster, perhaps much faster than us. And so, intelligent life, born like a baby into a world of resources, learning to tame the elements. How many times has this happened since the Big Bang? Could we possibly be the first? That sounds a little arrogant to me. But do they all develop opposable thumbs and learn to walk erect only to blow themselves up and wipe themselves out? We've actually had 5. Well, now 6 extinction events that we know of. Vast numbers of species go out of business. The planet hits the reset button and starts over. Turns out just because we had brains and shit didn't make us immune or exempt. Or as the late great Rick Perry famously said, oops. So, is this why we don't have any actual ETs? Hey, if you're out there, grow the fuck up, would ya? Sure, you've evolved over 1 million years, but watch out for that first internal combustion engine. It's gonna bite you in the ass. Yes, God gave us oil. Or God gave us trees that got squeezed down into oil. Or God gave us fungus that turned into trees. But if we're gonna pass the responsibility over to God, then well, then God did also give us brains and logical thinking and ultimately science. And while it was science, along with the oil and the engine that got us into this mess, it was also science that showed us the impact that shit was having on air, climate, temperature. We loved and embraced certain aspects of science that pleased and served us. We reject other aspects that threaten to take our goodies away. Year in, year out, Earth in, Earth out. Is this a cycle? Will each evolving species come to the same conclusion, or is it possible for maturity to outrace technology? How many infant, sentient species were there out there that never made it past that first year as toddler? How many are out there now, toddling along? How many have been listening to this odd stream of radio waves coming from Earth over the past century? Did you get bored and stop listening? Did you listen long enough to figure out there's some kind of language there? Are you listening now? On the off chance that you're listening now, or are perhaps recording this as some odd stream of bleeps and bloops that you will play back and translate later, I bleed my words into the abyss. What do you think these noises are? Are they God to you? Does God speak to you in bleeps? Probably not if you've been watching American television for the last 30 years. Okay, the God thing. Yeah, all right, let's go with that. This is God speaking. Let me think up some commandments. And scene. Back to actor Tim. And so, you may have noticed that I have written myself into a corner here. My character has put himself on a track of figuring out, if he could, however arrogantly or humbly, play God for a species that might take these words as some font of divine wisdom, what 10 things would they need to know in order to not make the same mistakes that we made? As I wrote those words back in 2017, almost 5 years ago, I had no idea where I was going to go with this. Of course, my character was talking to whatever Klingons or Vulcans might still be out there listening. But the audience, could they see those challenges that they might still take on before this all turns into some dystopian Mad Max hellscape? If, rather than telling you just how it all would go down in the future, you witnessed the impact of all those things that happened to the human being that you are watching, you kind of have to accept the hand that I'm dealing you, because that's how fiction works, with the willing suspension of disbelief. And so, having written myself into that particular corner, I developed my list. I started with things that were relatively simple and found myself scratching a little deeper with each successive commandment. And crucially, I included jokes, because jokes tend to disarm the naysayers. The list starts with issues that are purely proscriptive, what to do, or more often, what not to do. The first 3 commandments that came to mind were simple and aimed at the individual taking personal action. Number 1, whatever planet you grew up on, you evolved into a thinking species without air conditioning. 2, stop leaving your car running just for the sake of air conditioning your car. You're basically running the world's most expensive air conditioner by doing that. And 3, do not get too attached to any given form of technology. There are a ton of things that we now take for granted and see as being necessary to the sustenance of life that didn't even exist 200 years ago. Airline travel, for instance. As my character points out, the average round-trip trans-ocean flight leaves a carbon footprint roughly equivalent to driving the average car through the course of the average year per passenger. And so, having laid out these first 3 commandments, I can hear everyone's internal monologue screaming out about their absolute need for their creature comforts of air conditioning and travel. And so before we sink too deep into the self-pity around that, I move on to our economic and political predicament. Number 4, the cost of buying a thing needs to reflect the expense it inflicts on the planet at large. And number 5, those who make up your laws must not profit therein. Because, frankly, if the system enables me to get away with not paying for the damage I am participating in doing, I and the corporate universe will assume that damaging the planet is some kind of birthright. As I wrote, I was reminded of how we managed to rein in cigarette smoking. The percentage of adult smokers has declined from over 42% in the mid-60s to under 14% now. That's 1/3 of what it used to be. That's pretty incredible. How did that happen? In the 90s, we learned just how much the tobacco companies knew of the impact of using their product. Those companies faced lawsuits and taxes. Might we take similar action now? The political landscape has changed since the mid-90s, which is the reason for number 5, those who set up your laws must not profit therein. We're going to come back to that one. From here, I just had to take a look at a series of statistics that diverge wildly from a particular norm. Here are 3 statistics, each drawn from about the last 200 years. For tens of thousands of years, human population hovered around 1 million people worldwide. We didn't hit our first billion until around 1800. And since, we've increased that population 8-fold. In that same period of time, carbon levels have gone from 280 parts per million to over 410 parts per million, higher than it has been in 3 million years. Also, during that same time, the Earth's temperature has risen at an average of 0.14 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. And when you narrow that span to the last 40 years, it more than doubles, rising 0.32 degrees per decade. My character sums this all up in a pithy commandment, number 7, acknowledge screamingly impossible improbabilities. I would suggest that we have become so driven by our need for individual comfort and conspicuous consumption that we find ways to disregard that which makes demands of us, rather than to acknowledge the need to take action for our collective survival. We are not programmed as a culture to take collective action. We have our own issues, and we decided as a great republic that those issues are best solved when we each pull ourselves individually up by our own bootstraps and make it on our own. We made our very survival into a competition in which one or some of us win and the others do not. Is it humanly possible for us to extend that same impulse that we feel for, say, our blood relatives to those folks across the street, or for those on the other side of the planet who will inevitably feel the heat, the famines, the floods long before we do? I expect we all remember the battles over the Affordable Care Act, which seemed to bring out the worst in people, some of whom would argue that it was too much to have to share the pain of spreading the cost of our health care around. People actually said out loud, "The healthiest people are stuck paying out for the sick." We as a people, to our credit, managed to reach down far enough into our souls to rouse the collective sense of compassion. Back when he was running for president, Mitt Romney famously said, "Corporations are people, my friend." Most of us laughed at just how out of touch this guy was. And yet, this did not come out of nowhere. In 1886, the Supreme Court declared, almost by accident, that corporations are persons, and 90 years later, that money is speech. And then in 2010, the Citizens United case put those two dubious bits of logic together to find that corporations have a right to free speech by spending all the money that they want to express themselves with the people who write the laws that regulate their operations. Corporations are bound by corporate charter to earn profits, or otherwise run the risk of getting sued by investors. They are, by definition, equipped with less empathy than human beings, which, as we've pointed out, is a pretty low bar already. And so Man Cave goes from contemplating individual sacrifices to a glance at the broader collective needs and how our current political system stymies responding to urgency. My character only wants to be heard by whomever survives on this planet, or whomever might hear him in space. Because if there is no one left to tell the story, then what was the point to begin with? Commandment number 10. If the best I might offer is but one more day to the next generation, then I owe them that day, or that hour, or that minute. That's not quite the end of the play. Tim does a little more soul-searching before all is said and done, takes a little responsibility for his part in the calamity, and there's a kind of what we'd call a Lady or the Tiger ending, which leaves you wondering whether this was a comedy or a tragedy. But I've managed to share this with school groups, at festivals, conferences over the last 3 years as I drive my shows around the country. My favorite comment, which I actually get fairly often, is that it's terrifying and hilarious, which seems just about what I was aiming for. And so this has been Tim's Man Cave Explainer. And just a reminder, a pre-recorded version of this play is available at breakneckshakespeare.com, or you can book me personally via timmooney.com, where you can also find the book of Man Cave, a one-man sci-fi climate change tragicomedy. If you want to see another brief clip, perhaps click here. And with that, I'm going to say so long and see you on the stage.